With Prismatic about a month away, and with all the reveals that we've seen so far, I wanted to go through and spend some time learning about what's been revealed for us. If you're interested at all in theory crafting any of this, I highly recommend taking a look at the infographic posted on r/Destiny2, and the link for that will be in the description. While I've been mainly thinking in terms of PvE environments and what Prismatic brings to content like raids, dungeons, and GM Nightfalls, I will be releasing some PvP theory crafting videos before Final Shape launches. But for now, however, I gotta recommend checking out Hinra and Cami Cakes' videos on the matter. Both of their links will be in the description as well. But let's jump into it. Look, I'll start off with some thoughts on Prismatic, specifically for Warlock, before going into depth on my day one Prismatic build. Look, elephant in the room, we lose Well of Radiance, and it's a double-edged sword for sure. I think Well enforces some unhealthy habits and limits the choices Warlocks have in endgame content. But at the same time, it's a huge utility tool that makes Warlocks what they are. I think at the end of the day, Well and Bubble are both necessary evils for the environment that Destiny 2, specifically PvE, is in. And here's the big debate. Prismatic will definitely be getting people to ditch Solar, but in the same breath, it means that most Warlocks won't be able to run Prismatic in endgame content. You know, day one raids, GMs, normal raids even, dungeons, solo flawless attempts, just all of that kind of relies on Well. And if it's not pressure from their team, it's probably just going to be the utility hit that the class takes. Because I think the swap between Solar and Prismatic at the moment, from what we've seen, is a lot about it. You lose Heat Rises and the free melee energy that comes from that. And a lot of Warlocks just aren't going to like that. You know, Incinerator Snap is such a good ability. It's ignitions on hit, stuns, unstops, it staggers most normal enemies. It's such a good tool, and you want it up all of the time. So not being able to, through something like Heat Rises, is both a challenge to try and get people to recharge their melee faster, or it's just going to be a complete turn-off. And I think Prismatic will be a challenge for a lot of people to wrap their heads around building out. You know, you have all of these tools at your disposal and they seem to sync up with each other, and it's flashy and it looks cool, but at the end of the day, it might not be getting similar or better results than what we're already running. I'm going to pull the build up on screen now, and the goal with it is to not entirely compete with Solar, Warlock, and Well of Radiance as a whole, but to sort of imagine a different approach to everything, and the sort of design that we know that Bungie's going for with Warlock through Arc Soul and Void Soul, and now the new Solar Soul, Hellion. And this build functions around Hellion mainly. The biggest draw here definitely would be being able to use Hellion and the Prismatic Grenade and combining that with Feed the Void, but we'll get into it. Starting off with the super, because it arguably is the most important part of any Prismatic build from what we've seen, because it affects stuff like your fragments and the different buffs you get and all of the utility, how it meshes together. And so I've decided to go with either Song of Flame or Needlestorm, and so that's based on mainly how good Song of Flame is. If we're talking D1, infinite grenades, infinite melees, like 100% ability uptime for like 20 seconds, that has its merits. That is something that definitely could see a lot of use through, you know, just ad clear or even some boss DPS examples. But as a safety net, Needlestorm is there as well because it's a great one and done damage super. And it also works well with some of the fragments that we've got below, but we'll get into that in a second. For the melee, I think Incinerator Snap just sort of has to be included. It's hands down the best Warlock melee for PvE. Quick and consistent, it does good damage to a wide area. Something needs to be said about Arcane Needle. Because we don't have Ember of Empyrean anymore, or at this current moment we don't. Ember of Empyrean was the fragment on Solar that increases the duration of your buffs when you get a matching or a Solar kill. Arcane Needle, because it has 3 charges, that's 3 separate charges of Radiant, which is really good for stacking Transcendence. And the reason why it's so good is because it's darkness damage, so it's strand damage, and a light buff that's being applied. So it's charging both your dark and light parts of your Transcendence, which is pretty much double. It wasn't until I started theory crafting Prismatic that I realized that most grenades aren't that great without aspects. The obvious example, I think, is pulse grenades. I think pulse grenades, you think of them as this oppressive, high damage ability, but it's only really good on Arc Titan because of the aspect. And I think the same goes especially with Warlock. In the grenade slot, we've got Storm, Healing, Vortex, Cold Snap, and Threadling. And I think probably the highlights here are Cold Snap and Threadling, because that enables builds like a Threadling, Strand, pseudo minion Warlock, as well as Cold Snaps with Osmiomancies and Bleak Watchers, and just being able to freeze everything in a 10-mile radius. The grenades, I think it comes down to personal preference. I think running Feed the Void and Feed the Void being such an obvious pick, being able to proc Devour on any ability kill, I think we need to run a damaging grenade. So Healing, Cold Snap, and Threadling are more or less off the table. Storm grenades, I believe, deal more damage. Maybe Threadling does. I'm not too sure. But Storm grenades jolt overloads when you're running Facet of Dominance. Vortex grenades weaken with Facet of Dominance. They both work with Facet of Justice, which is while Transcendent, ability Final Blows give bloom. They make enemies explode. And so I think the grenade is not an important part of this build, but I will experiment between Storm, Vortex, and probably Threadlings. For movement abilities, I think the obvious pick has to be Burst Glide, with Balance and Strafe just not being as good, and Blink staying as a pseudo-niche PvP-centric option. I like running Blink. I know people who like running Blink. It's just not for me in PvE. I feel like I have less control overall, but I am faster and I do have more options available. It's just the lack of control doesn't really sit well with me. Phoenix Dive is a great class ability. It's unfortunate that Hellion might not have an interaction specifically with it, and if it does, I guarantee that I'll be using Phoenix Dive, but for the moment it's either going to be Empowering Rift or Healing Rift, and that's based on the difficulty. If I need that extra healing and that safety net, I'll be running Healing, and if not, I'll be running Empowering Rift. Now the aspects we've already covered, we're going to be running Hellion and Feed the Void. And Hellion seems, so far from what we've seen, to be pretty good. It's a AoE soul, comes up on class ability use, and it applies Scorch on hit, and we could potentially see some ignitions coming out of that. This build overall will rely on maintaining near 100% Rift uptime to always have a Hellion out. And Feed the Void is Devour on ability kill, pretty self-explanatory. Hopefully it has some synergy with Hellion. If Hellion gets a kill, maybe we'll be seeing a Feed the Void proc, like how with Void Souls work, but I'm not too sure at the moment. Now the Fragments are where Prismatic really shines. We seem to have most of the best Fragments in the game here, just renamed and with some extra functionalities. Starting off, I think we have a pretty mandatory fragment here, Facet of Purpose, which is just when you pick up an Orb of Power, it gives you an elemental buff based on the super that you have. So if we're going to be running Song of Flame and Solar, we'll be getting Restoration on Orb pickup, which is pretty good. On Void, you get an Overshield. On Arc, you get Amplify. On Stasis, you get Frost Armor. And probably most importantly, on Strained, you get Woven Mail. And this just combines all of the fragments that we've seen so far on every other class in the game. Now the second fragment here is where the build starts to come together. Facet of Hope gives class ability energy recharge rate while buffed, and so the buffs are Amplify, Cure, Restoration, Radiant, Devour, Invisibility, Void Overshield, Frost Armor, and Woven Mail, and that's what we've seen so far. That's the complete list that we have at the moment. And I think this is going to be great because you're pretty much always going to have a buff of some kind. You're going to be Radiant from your melees, or you're going to have Woven Mail or Restoration from picking up an orb, and so it all ends up tying back into your class ability Regenerate to maximize Hellion. Next we have Facet of Dawn, which is just Ember of Torches, where charged melee hits grant you Radiant, and charged melee kills grant your nearby teammates Radiant as well. And I think this is a no-brainer. I think being able to always have that damage buff from Radiant is going to be so useful, and we've seen it be super useful in all content. Now, finally, this is if we have 4 fragment slots with these 2 aspects. We're not too sure at the moment. And this one is definitely subject to change. Facet of Justice. While Transcendent, ability Final Blows explode. It's Bloom from Destiny 1, and it does need testing, but it could work with Hellion for Ignition and Scorch spreading, especially if the explosion type is dependent on the damage type that killed the enemy. And if Transcendence isn't great, just not going to end up using it. We'll find something else. You know, there are plenty of really good options here, and we have 9 more that we haven't seen. And so I definitely think that this one specifically is going to be the first to go. One of the upsides of Prismatic as well is the exotic variety that you get to run. If you want to focus on something specific, then you 100% can, and it opens up a lot of options for different and unique interactions between exotics. And so I think also most of these are probably pretty obvious choices. And we start with Nezarec Sin, which is just getting void kills gives bonus ability regen. And I think that's great. Being able to run something like Recluse, Funnel Web, Elsie's Rifle, just being able to consistently stack that bonus ability regen is super helpful for basically any build in the game. We also have Dawn Chorus on the list, and that's only for the 200% bonus Scorch damage. The Daybreak Projectile bonus damage doesn't come into play here, which is unfortunate, but the Scorch damage is really nice. I Have Another World is another simple one. It's just a flat 50% ability regenerate. And the extra effect is nice, but it's not really mandatory for anything. Verity's Brow. So solar and strand kills based on the super that we're running gives the bonus grenade damage and recharge rate to both yourself and your nearby teammates. And I think with the grenade not being super important for this build, I think it's okay. I don't think I will be running it, but it definitely is an option. I was going back through and looking at some of my old builds when Lightfall came out and Strand released, and the Necrotic Grip, Osteostriga, Weaver's Trance build sort of came to my mind. We also know that kinetic damage increases Transcendence, and so depending on how good that is, we could be seeing some Osteostriga, Necrotic Grip, Ad Clear coming in to maximize your uptime on Transcendence. Seeing as we have so many good solo weapons at the moment, I wanted to include Mantle of Battle Harmony on this list. It is a slept-on exotic, 100%, and I think I will only be using it, however, if I'm running Song of Flame, so that I can run some of these solo weapons like Tyranny of Heaven, Sunshot, Polaris Lance, you know, the list goes on. Mida Callus Mini Tool, and even something like Drang. Like, just being able to have so many options, have a damage buff, and recharging your super faster, I feel like it will tie in super well with just being able to pop Song of Flame and go in for 20 seconds before backing up and then recharging it again super quickly. Prismatic also features the exotic class item, which is combining 2 exotics on other classes, and they are randomly rolled, so this is my current wish list. I will be going over each of them and explaining sort of what part of each that I'm looking forward to. These are potentials. We don't know what is going to be rolled on the exotic class item. We have no clue what could be there. Besides, I think Assassin's Cal and Ophidian's Aspect, I think, are the 2 that we've seen. But what we do know is that it won't be the entire exotic ability just thrown onto the class item. It'll be a select part of it. So a good example is that the Spirit of Assassin from Assassin's Cal will only grant the invisibility upon a finisher kill and not the healing. This list is semi-realistic. I think that most of these probably won't make the cut, but they are cool to Theorycraft and cool to mess around with. And so starting off, Armamentarium and Claws of Ahamkara for an extra grenade and extra melee, respectively. I think both of these are good. They contribute to getting some of those buffs up and keeping things rolling on the ability end. Assassin's Cal, also just mentioned, it's a nice quality of life, a little bit of utility. Getting a finisher kill granting full invis is pretty nice, and it does work with things like Facet of Hope, giving us that extra class ability energy while invis. One I'd like to see personally is the Stag, and I think being able to drop a Rift on death is probably not the feature that would be included. I think it would be the class ability energy regen while low on health. And I think it'd be really nice to just get that extra class ability energy in a pinch, Path of the Burning Steps is a weird one. I love this exotic on Titan. Getting a tier 4 surge upon getting some solo kills, it's great. I don't think that will be included in the exotic class item. I think if we are getting Path of the Burning Steps, it'll be the Stasis Breakout into a solar explosion, which is pretty good. I think with the new enemy faction, the Dread, we've seen a lot of stasis and a lot of strand abilities, and I think if we're going to be getting frozen a lot, something like Burning Steps would be super useful for not taking damage and retaliating a little bit. Precious Scars is one that I don't think will be included, but I will 100% use it if it is included, where the matching final blows give you regen and give your allies regen. We could also potentially see the effect being relegated to being revived or reviving someone grants them an overshield and grants you an overshield. And that would be really disappointing because I think Precious Scars is one of the coolest exotics and it's only getting a lot of love and use recently. I've been seeing it a lot more in PvP. I'm not entirely sure why. Just a quick editor's note here. Nico did a video recently explaining why Precious Scars is so good in PvP at the moment, and it comes from the Res Shield actually. It's super useful in Trials, especially if you're running in a stack. And the link for that will be in the description as well. I highly suggest you check it out if you're interested in Precious Scars and weird PvP tech. The final one that I could think of off the top of my head when I was going through this was the Mark IV Stand-asides. And these function only with shoulder charge at the moment, but it would be really cool to see them on an exotic class item, giving us 50% melee energy back on a hit. And I think it would be entirely broken, and I think everyone would use it, but it is something that I would really like to see. So yeah, that's the Prismatic Warlock build for the moment. I'm really looking forward to Final Shape and seeing the Fragments and seeing Prismatic be fleshed out more. We will be releasing more videos for Titan and Hunter, both PvE and PvP videos in the lead-up weeks to Final Shape. All of the resources that we used in this video are down in the description, and if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.